everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is the second one of these that we have held. A reminder that this session is being recorded. Bernie can see any questions that you are asking, but we'll address them at the end. And the session will also be available on the member portal. The agenda is on the second slide. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, which we've already covered off, and please type questions which we've already covered off on as well. I'll just follow the slides. It's probably a better way of doing this. If you can please read through the slides as we go. We'll give you enough time to do that. Now, these slides will not be shared. Members will receive more prescriptive information on the AOL notice of meetings, which will be sent out at the end of October. If we run out of time, which I don't expect we will, then if you have any other questions that we don't address today, you can just reach out to myself directly or Bernie directly. That's a slide of the board of directors as it currently has. Now, this constitution or the updated constitution is not a new issue. I believe that this has been on at least 3 AGM agendas. The constitution is outdated. The constitution is coming up to 32 years old. And the organisation is no longer that which it used to be. So this is just something that we've been meaning to get to for quite a few years. Last year was a very disruptive year. It wasn't on the AGM for 2020, but it's certainly beyond time now and something that the organisation really does have to do. So we've covered on that, and yes, the other thing is that we are now 3 years after demerge, so we no longer have a certifying business behind us. We are now just an advocacy body, and the constitution is the constitution of what used to be a farmers cooperative made by those good-looking people you can see on the screen there. As we've gone through on the slide, we are no longer the business that we used to be. We have certainly evolved. BFA was initially formed in 1987. Because BFA represented organic and biodynamic, a specific form of organic production farmers, and the Board of Term Biological Farmers was chosen to promote a simple message that such farmers were using natural methods to produce foods for consumers. So I'm reading my notes, which is there. You guys are here. I won't bother going through this point by point. They're the guys that wrote the original constitution. If you go back the slide, the board of directors are now the new guys. It's just time for an upgrade. So we look very differently, we dress differently. It is an entire new century. We need a new constitution. That's basically what it is. According to my notes here, the constitution is actually 34 years old. But basically everything's changed. We need to change with it. Bernie will just go to the next slide. Now, our new remit, or our new 4 pillars, from protect, promote, engage, and consult. That's the 5-year plan that's been shared by members. Members have signed off on that. That's the new plan. We need a constitution that allows us to execute that plan. We need a constitution that allows us to follow through with the mandate that our members have given us. We need a constitution that allows us to be the peak body for Australian organics, and that's why we've made these changes. seeing if I've missed any of the notes that we have. And we need a constitution that allows us that when we do achieve domestic regulation, which we are very confident that we will get, government is supportive of that. The process has begun. We now just have to work through government to do that. Our constitution has to be such that it can function in what will be a very changed landscape. Bernie, we'll go to slide 8. Why do we need to change? Again, this is, I suppose, the same detail, but slightly different format. The objects have been updated. Membership types. Now, note that we worked through with PwC on this. We worked through with the Australian Institute of Directors on this. Membership types, we've clarified. There is no erosion of member rights. So if you are already a member of our company, we have maintained your rights as they are. So there's been no erosion of member rights. We have given more detail on skill set of directors. We've given more detail on the format of the subcommittees. It is more prescriptive, it is not outdated, and it is fit for purpose, unlike our current constitution. And we've been very, very, very aware of good corporate governance. We've had a few members that have peppered us on what the AICD wants, what good corporate governance wants. We actually engaged the AICD on this, and we got their feedback. We got them to send through a document which was their short list of good corporate governance for not-for-profit businesses, and we've taken that on board. Next slide, Bernie.
This is my cue. Yep. Thanks, Martin. So as Martin said, the need for change is because the current constitution is outdated. One of the great things that Martin and the board has actually shared is that we all own our own businesses, and there is no document or policy that we still use today that is 30 years old, and the AO has evolved over time. When we started this process of updating our constitution, we actually, as Martin alluded to, we actually engaged with key stakeholders in the industry and also experts in the field. Seafood Industry Australia is actually one very similar industry body that went through a very similar thing to us a few years ago, and they actually went through to update their constitution. So we had a chat with them. And they actually engaged PricewaterhouseCoopers to draft the constitution. AR has concurrently engaged PwC to provide us with legal advice in terms of drafting the constitution and making sure that we don't erode existing members' rights. And concurrently with that, we've actually looked at the Australian Institute of Company Directors not-for-profit governance principles, which outlines good governance principles to make sure that that is embedded in the new constitution. Overall, in terms of just this actual exercise itself, we've got the current constitution. We're also bound under the Corporations Act and under our constitution not to amend existing members' rights. The new constitution does not do that. In fact, it just clarifies what members' rights are. So that's the one thing that we just want to be clear on and clarify, and certainly that's consistent with our instructions with PricewaterhouseCoopers. In terms of the change, we actually engaged with members, key members, to draft the constitution. We actually convened a task force comprising key members. We held a number of meetings with PwC and the task force members. Quentin Kennedy from Kiala Pure Foods, who's also an ex-AO board member, and is heavily also involved in, the demerger with ACO a few years ago. Was part of that task force, and Quentin also was part of the Australian Organic Industry Working Group that the government convened. Dooley Bellamy, who's the Bellamy co-founder and runs Storm in India, which is an organic tea company, also was involved. Annie Brown-Junn, Organics 2018 AO Chairman of the Year Award, and has been an ongoing AO board member. And Roger Pitt, I don't need to outline what Roger's credentials are, but Roger has been around for a number of years and, a very valued member. And Martin and I were part of that task force, and we met with PwC. We had ongoing meetings to actually discuss the changes. And one of the key things that we went through with a fine-tooth comb was actually those key changes of why we needed to update the Constitution and what those updates are, and to make sure that there's a balance there with good corporate governance. Martin, is there anything else you wanted to add in this slide?
Only that our current Constitution had been updated once before, sometime in the late 70s, I believe, and Quentin Kennedy and Annie Brown-Junn were part of that process. So that was also one of the reasons why they're part of this task force, because they updated the previous Constitution once before.
And one of the things that the task force actually said was that we have to have member engagement as part of this, and hence why we're running these webinars and info sessions, and the fact that Martin and I are contactable for any member queries about the Constitution. In terms of the process for change, as a member-based organisation, it's important that we engage with our key members and consult with key members and all members. That's been ongoing, and this slide just outlines essentially, the process to date. We're in the member consultation phase right now. Next month will be the AGM notice of meeting that will be released. And then we'll have the AGM, which will actually table the request and approval by members to adopt a new form constitution. This, we thought it was useful to actually outline the AICD's definition of good corporate governance, which is what we're trying to achieve as part of this change. The AICD Good Governance Principle is actually a practical framework to help not-for-profits like AO understand and achieve good governance. It keeps us accountable. It makes sure that, we actually fulfill our roles over and above our legal obligations, and at the same time make sure that there is a framework in place to make sure that the board and the leaders and the members act in the best interest of their organisation from a long-term perspective. The next two slides just outlines those 10 principles outlined in the AICD Good Governance Principles. We're not going to go through a lecture on what those are. You can, look it up, read it up on your own time. But each of those principles are actually embedded within the new Constitution and our operating framework as a peak body. Some of those principles were actually unclear or absent in the old or current Constitution. So that's why we're curing that by drafting this new Constitution in consultation with the task force and PwC's best practice. The key thing as well is that when we were consulting with PwC about this, they actually said to us, the current director election process is actually political, and it's actually against good governance. they indicated that, one of the key things that a lot of public companies that are similarly set up to us with a similar remit to us is that board members are actually ratified by members, and they are skills based on the needs of the organisation. So that is one of the key things that we've adopted as a task force, and adopted in the new constitution as well. Martin, over to you.
Okay, so when PwC prepared our new constitution, they used their most current template and updated it based on how our organisation works. So they have a template which they believe is best practice for not-for-profits, and it's been used by quite a lot of other organisations in Australia that are very similar to ourselves. Because they've done that, it is impossible to show you track changes because it's pretty much a completely new document. But what we have done and what we will do is we will mark up where the significant changes are. In the interest of transparency, we're providing you with key changes new from old. We'll also be flagging which of the AICD good governance principles weren't represented and now are represented. And you will also receive a side-by-side comparison with your AGM notice of meeting. The key updates to the Constitution are objects to reflect what we do as an organisation now, electronic transactions and meetings for legal compliance. Because our old Constitution was so old, it didn't actually allow for meetings such as this. It didn't allow for virtual meetings, so that's been updated. Director selection, as per good governance and skills matrix. CEO appointment, that's been updated as to how we do that as well, as per good governance. And the committees have been simplified as per good governance, and to give AOL flexibility to convene advisory committees when and as and when needed based on the issues that the board have identified and representative of members' requirements. I think that pretty much covers all of that. The whole process has certainly been transparent. It will continue to be transparent. There's no significant changes. We've been very careful not to erode members' rights. Bernie, you want to take it from here?
Yep. So just as what Martin said, here's a summary essentially of the existing table of contents in the Constitution and the new one essentially. And it, there's 24 sections in the new one. There was 29 with schedules in the old one. So again, that's back to the drafting. And in fact, the Constitution is very much up to date because law was only recently passed a few weeks ago about how electronic transactions should be incorporated into Constitution. So you can be rest assured that we've got the most updated Constitution essentially. In terms of the objects and the details, this is a screenshot of the proposed new objects. It is actually reflective of what we are doing at the moment, the fact that we no longer operate a certification body as well. And it reflects as well what we will be doing in the future, essentially based on, once we've got domestic regulation in place and broadening the ability of AR as a peak body. It also maintains the rights of AR as a not-for-profit, and where there are objects in there that allows AO to avail of a tax exemption as a not-for-profit, those have been retained. In terms of membership, this is essentially a clarification of what the new membership provisions are under the new Constitution. On the side there, we've outlined, which AICD principles that essentially, addresses. the current constitution, you know, we look at it on the basis of we've got a volleyball and it's been punctured so many times that you put a band-aid over that volleyball. That's our current constitution. What we're trying to do is actually give you a new volleyball that will allow it to do what it needs to do, essentially. And to be clear, we haven't altered any existing membership rights. All we've done is actually clarified what those rights are. This is, again, just outlining what the categories, what the memberships are, what the categories are. You can see there that we've actually clarified, you know, that we do have grandfathered members and they do have voting rights. And we do have associate voting and associate non-voting members. We've outlined eligibility to apply to become a member. And the current provisions in the Constitution about directors having the ability to admit a person as a member, essentially, and member rights and expulsion provisions as well. We've also clarified the appointment and removal of directors, and this is consistent with good governance principles, which pretty much touches on most of the principles there, and also good governance consistent with the Corporations Act. Martin, did you want to go through the process for the appointment and removal of directors under the new constitution?
Is that in my notes, Benny?
I'm happy to go through them.
Yeah, because
yeah. Okay, no, that's fine.
It's probably something you are more across than what I am. But
sorry to put you on the spot there. So in terms of what is changing in the appointment and removal of directors is what Martin indicated earlier was that we do need a skills-based board. The current process is politicised, which is not good governance. In fact, it's against the best interest of the organisation. So we've actually uniformed what happens in the appointment and removal of directors based on what public companies do, similar to AO and ASX listed companies as well, and also the provisions of the Corporations Act. So the number of directors is the same, the term is the same. We will always have, as part of good governance, the same amount of directors rotating, which is generally 1/3 of the directors have to retire. What has changed though is we've got a nomination and remuneration committee essentially that will be convened by the board, and that nomination and remuneration committee will be responsible for outlining the skill sets or the skills matrix required for AO to actually achieve its strategic objectives. The NOM and REM committee will then put a call out or an EOI to all eligible members to apply to be appointed as directors. That EOI will be based on the skills matrix that is required to be filled based on that year. And once they receive that EOI, they will then make recommendations to the board to on the individuals who should be appointed to the board. Those individuals will be appointed to the board, and then they will then be presented at the next AGM for the members to ratify. So that's very much consistent with the provisions of the Corporations Act and what is best practice. The NOM and REM committee essentially will comprise of independent members, essentially. So when we mean independent members that will aren't conflicted with the current sitting board members. So at no time will that NOM and REM committee will actually have someone in there that is a director that is due for re-election, essentially.
So the point of this is, as Bernadette was saying, that from a skills matrix point of view, We don't want 3 people on the board that are from the same industries. And this way the Rem Non-Committee can identify where our gaps are. So at the moment, for instance, we have identified that we don't have, we're probably a little bit light on with the dairy industry, but we've got livestock covered. We've got we've got broadacre covered. We've got a little bit of crossover that we feel reasonably comfortable. We're not too exposed with dairy. We've got food processing covered. So the whole point of this is to make sure that we have as much coverage of our skill set and of our member base as we can possibly get. On the board, we want decision makers. We want people that are running their own companies, that have some skin in the game, that have ownership, and are prepared to make commercial decisions for the benefit of the entire industry. And the main thing for this is that this is not a political process. It shouldn't be a political process. It is bad practice for it to be a political process. And what is probably the most telling on this is usually only 10% of our members vote. So 90% of our members don't actually determine who gets on the board. So this would be a much better process, a much more managed process, and it would actually end up involving more people and more members than our current voting process. So going back to you.
Thank you. That's just outlines what we've just said. So these are the casual appointments. Again, we've clarified what the powers and duties of directors are. Again, part of good governance. We've also added a provision about the CEO and expressly stating that the CEO cannot be a director. It's unusual that we don't have provisions in the current constitution about the CEO. That is part of any modern constitution in my experience. So we've added that in there with the help of PwC's advice. The other aspect as well is the committees, as Martin alluded to. We've broadened the ability for directors to actually convene committees from time to time, and the fact that the board may delegate its powers to committees based on the terms of reference, and outlining essentially, you know, the ability for the board to decide, you know, whether it's a short-term or a project-based committee based on its requirement to discharge its duties as a director, as a board of director of AO. So that's pretty much, that concludes the summary of the changes to the constitution, or the key changes. We'll open it up now for any questions if you want to type it in the Q&A or in the chat. Martin and I are happy to outline that. While you're doing that, just as a reminder that the AGM notice of meeting and relevant documents will be available on the member portal. And you'll need to make sure that you've got those login details. If you don't, please feel free to reach out to the membership's email address, and one of the talented people from the office will reach out and help you out on that. Okay. Just having a look to see if there are any questions. So Bridget, thank you, has commented, thank you, very helpful. Sounds like some good changes. Look forward to seeing it in place. Thanks for that comment, Bridget. No other questions that I can see. Okay, great. On that point, is there any last points you'd want to share, Martin, or are you happy for us to?
Good meetings, good meeting. This is the end of my day. So again, thank you for being interested enough to to log into this. We said that to the task force members as well, because it's a very dry process. And only the legal people like Bernadette actually get excited about it. The rest of us, we just have to grind through it. But we got some good input. It was good having that task force people on board. And as I said, all the way we engaged through PwC, we engaged with AICD. I believe we've done best practice, best everything, and we followed process. And I think the end result will stand our company in good stead for hopefully the next 30 odd years.
On that note, we'll end the meeting, and thank you for taking the time to attend today's session.
All right, cheers, bye-bye.